Well, good morning, folks. We certainly appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here. Boy, that light is bright.
You're a TV star, guy.
We certainly appreciate you taking the time out of the day to be here. And Paul and I like to do these twice a year. We do one before session and then one after session. Just a couple of things to go over, and then I'll turn it over to Paul, and then we'll go to questions. But if you've been listening kind of to what's going on in the news and stuff, it's kind of an interesting time in the Minnesota Senate and Minnesota House. I'll talk a little on the Senate part. With the death of Senator Dziedzic, that recreated a special election, and that special election will happen the end of January. So we're scheduled to go in and start the session on January 14th. And there's some concern if we'll actually be starting on January 14th. Because there also is another senator that may be in court that week because she was charged with a felony when she broke into her stepmother's house up in Detroit Lakes. And so, depending on how this all checks out, it is such a thing that the first day of session, that the majority of the members there could be Republicans. So the rumor is that the DFL senators may not show up for session, because if they got a quorum, we can set who the leadership would be, and we could do things like that with the majority, because organizations can be done with just the majority of the vote. So we'll see how that plays out. Hopefully that's not how it works out, but we'll see how that plays out. And so the election will be on the 28th of January for the seat that Senator Dziedzic had. And that's an inner city seat pretty much in Minneapolis, so that will be a DFL seat. So the DFL will hold a majority in the Senate once that's all settled down. The other thing that's going to be, this is a cycle year for budgeting, and that's always an interesting time. And in November, we did have the forecast for the November, and that was a $661 million surplus. However, as it seems to be heading into February, it looks like it's going to be somewhat less than that. And so our budget will be based on the February forecast, so we'll get into doing the budgeting on that once we get that forecast. So it's going to be kind of an interesting year. I think it's going to take a lot of cooperation and stuff to get things done and keep things moving, but that's what we're there for, and so we'll certainly try to make sure that we can get some of that stuff done. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for showing up this morning to our town hall meeting. It's appreciated. Good to see some mostly familiar faces, and we'll get to questions here in a minute, but before we do that, just a few things. I was elected to my 9th term in the Minnesota House of Representatives last November. I don't know where the years have gone, but they go by quickly. And this year I will be either chairing or co-chairing the Ways and Means Committee. Ways and Means is where all the money flows through, so I will have my work cut out for me to try and figure out how we get to a balanced budget by the end of session. Gary kind of explained the situation in the Senate. We have a somewhat similar situation in the Minnesota House. The results of the November election, the House was tied 67-67. That happened once in history back in 1978 election. They went into the 79 session tied, and there's some very interesting history that I've been studying a bit about how that was handled then. This time we're tied again, but we have already seen a situation in Roseville where the representative will not be seated. He's actually conceded that he will not try to be seated. So on opening day, if everybody showed up on the House floor, we Republicans would have a 67-66 advantage. And we could elect a speaker with 67 members. There's precedent for that. They've elected speakers in the past with less than 68 votes. And that's what we intend to do. However, the Democrats yesterday had a press conference and stated that they intend to be on strike, that they're not going to show up for session opening day, that they are going on strike and will not show up until the special election in that particular House seat has been determined. It's a strong Democrat district. That Democrat will probably win that seat and we'll be back to 67 tie. But in the meantime, we won't be able to get started on balancing this budget. That is our huge challenge that's ahead of us. And we're starting a week later than we would normally start. Apparently, and that was set by the Democrats also. Apparently, they thought that yesterday was too close to the first of the year, so they wanted some extra time to prepare and scheduled our first day later. So stay tuned is my advice. We have a second contested election in the Shakopee district that you may be familiar with, where Tabke won by 14 votes, but there were 20 ballots that were destroyed by somebody within the county election structure, and those 20 ballots had not been counted. So that is in the hands of a judge as we speak, and how that particular race is determined, what the judge says could have a dramatic effect on what happens in the legislature too. He could decide that it should go to special election, or what I think is more likely, he could decide that it go back to the legislature, where we as the legislature would determine whether there should be a special election in that case. And if that would happen, he cannot vote on his own situation. So again, the Republicans would have that 67-66 advantage. And I believe that's the real reason the Democrats are going on strike. But that's somewhat conjecture on my part. Anyway, that's kind of the situation on the floor. In the meantime, we have this budget that needs to be balanced. And we've got forecasts that indicate that there's not going to be enough money in the future to have the budget that we have in place today. So we need to tighten our belts. We need to figure out what our priorities are and fund those priorities, and we need to jettison some programs that are not priorities. There was a significant amount of one-time spending in last year's budget. So that's helpful because one-time spending is easier to jettison than some of these long-term programs. And the Democrats built in some more inflation into the budget, and that money is sitting there, but it hasn't been allocated. So we have some opportunities there to do some rearranging. You may remember the last shutdown during the Dayton administration, when we were shut down for 21 days, and it finally broke when the beer deliveries stopped. People got thirsty, I guess. There are other reasons too, but that's kind of the show. But at that time, the governor could determine what essential services were, and those could be continued to be funded. The courts have, in the interim, the courts have decided that's no longer an option. So if there is a state shutdown, it will be immediate, and all state-funded endeavors would come to a screeching halt, which would have immediate impact on everyone. So a shutdown is not an option in my book, and I hope that's the way we all approach the work, that we decide that we're going to get the work done in a timely fashion. You gotta reach an agreement sometime. Why not reach it in good time? So we'll see how that goes. We have a number of priority issues that we think are important, and many of them are, if you look at the election results of the state of Minnesota, and for the Minnesota House of Representatives, a Republican will represent all or part of every county in the state of Minnesota, all 87 counties. Democrats will represent portions of 17 counties. That's an unbalanced situation. And we've seen the results of that in recent legislation where we believe Greater Minnesota has not been treated fairly. And it's my objective, and I know it's Gary's too, to try and see that Greater Minnesota is treated more fairly in the future. And we will do everything we can to accomplish that. With that, I think we're really here to hear from you and answer your questions. So please, we'll start with Mr. Weigel. I think your hand was up one moment before John was.
Question I have is, about 7-8 years ago, there was a buffer law passed,
Yes.
and there's been no compensation for that, for the land property owners. And I believe this session that there's a bill that's going to be moving forward to help us with the taxes on that. I would ask that you please support that, and please let your views known to some of the other representatives that are not familiar with that situation that we are facing.
Thank you, Mr. Weigel. I've been contacted weeks ago by corn growers, and I'll probably be chief author on that bill. I'll be on it whether I'm chief or not. I may try to hand it off to one of our newer colleagues, but it's a legitimate issue, and I'm certainly happy to support it. So, in fact, was instrumental in writing the bill when it was first introduced a few years ago. So we'll see how that goes. Lufke.
Hi. So thank you both for what you do. I agree with you on almost everything. Put in my plug again for getting rid of taxes on Social Security. And can Minnesota learn something from Iowa? I mean, the people aren't starving. They still have roads and schools and everything, but their taxes are just like half on farmland and in income tax, I believe.
Well, you bring up a very good point, and this is something that Paul and I have been working on for years, is to get the tax on Social Security, to get that so that you're not paying tax on Social Security. When the money went into Social Security, it was post-taxed money, so it had been taxed when it was taken out of your paycheck. It had already been taxed. So there's no reason that we're taxing it again when you're receiving it as a retirement Social Security fund. What's interesting is in the 2022 election, the Republicans made a very strong stand that they wanted to get rid of Social Security. The Democrats made a very strong stand they wanted to get rid of Social Security. The governor made a very strong stand that he wanted to get rid of Social Security. When the trifecta came about, they decided they didn't want to get rid of tax on Social Security because they didn't want to help the wealthy. So their opinion was that if you were paying, because there is, at the base level, you don't pay tax on Social Security, and then we got a piece, we added some more dollars so you could make more income and not pay tax on Social Security. Then in 2023, they changed that a little bit, and so under a certain income, you do not pay tax on Social Security. After that, you do. And they said, well, they just didn't feel that they could continue to help the wealthy, that the wealthy needed to pay their fair share. So that's why we're still paying Social Security, taxes on Social Security, but we'll be fighting again for that this year because I just don't think it's a fair tax and I don't think it makes any sense. However, the other side of the fence is that where do we take that money from if we don't collect it on tax on Social Security? And that's one of the biggest problems with the overspending that was done in 2023 when we had a $39.5 billion budget. They had to figure out where they were going to get the money from, and so that was one of the areas that they did not reduce in order to collect taxes on that. So we'll see where it goes this year, but there will certainly be bills moving that forward.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure you two are aware of the predicament long-term care is in Minnesota, and specifically greater Minnesota. The discrimination between Twin City reimbursement and rural reimbursement. I know the Republicans a couple of years ago had a pretty good plan in place that would have carried things forward for about 10 years and it got voted down. Is there any hope of getting some type of a long-term fix for reimbursement so we don't lose our long-term care facility?
Well, I believe there is. Both Gary and I have worked on this issue hard over the years, made some progress, but permanent, long-term progress has been evasive. It's a complicated situation, but the impact is very real here in New Ulm and all across greater Minnesota, as you know. We've seen, I think, close to 30 nursing homes close. And in a small community, a nursing home isn't, in my opinion anyway, isn't just a nursing home. It's a community center of care in many ways. And we've been trying hard to get the Democrats to understand how important these issues are. And for some reasons that I don't completely understand, they just don't see the problem the same way we see it. But we're in a better position this year now that we've broken the trifecta. It is certainly a priority of mine, and I'll let Gary speak for himself, but I know it's a priority of his too, to try and figure out how we can untie this knot and put our nursing homes on solid financial ground. At the same time, we've got this issue with employees that is also a huge challenge, just the lack of employees being number one, but also the situation that's developed with when you have a spot that you have to fill, it's mandatory you fill it, you have to go out into this other market to hire employees that are much more expensive than the local employees. And then you pile on top of that all the problems we have with reimbursement rates from the federal government and the cost of medications that is going to continue to skyrocket, and the amount of money that the pharmacy benefit managers are kind of siphoning off as middlemen in that whole situation. And we have some very expensive drugs coming on to the scene that it just goes on and on. But I'll let Gary kind of give you his response.
It certainly is a big issue. And the problem we have is trying to get some movement on that is if we look at the Medicaid rates that are paid in the 7-county metro area and the Medicaid rates that are paid in rural Minnesota, there's a big difference. And so with a strong block of Twin City legislators, they don't see our problem the way we see it because they don't have near as many issues with nursing homes there as what we do out here because of that disparity. So it's hard to get their attention to want to put money out here to do that. At this point, they would prefer to put it in more education, school education and things like that for younger people. Well, it's easy to say that when you're being taken care of pretty well by Medicaid in the homes within the Twin Cities. Out here, we know what those rates are, and we know that it's just a stronghold. It just doesn't work. And so we got to keep trying to get things done. And you're right, not too many years ago, we did have a plan laid out, but we couldn't get the votes to do it. 2 years ago, in 2023, we did get a major block of money. Right at the end of the session, we were able to negotiate something out, and we got like $332 million. And a good share of that went to rural Minnesota. Unfortunately, a lot of our metro legislators thought that that was the healing pill right there, that took care of everything. That was just to get us through a few more sunsets. I mean, that was just, it was just a Band-Aid on a wound that was still growing. And so we still have that struggle, and we will have bills introduced again this year, and hopefully we can get hearings on them. We need to do something for rural nursing homes, not just rural nursing homes, homes for the handicapped and assisted living. We're just behind the 8 ball compared to what the Twin Cities is, and so we need to start getting that equalized. Unfortunately, it's not just nursing homes, it's education, and there's about 3 or 4 other things that it's the same way. Is we're drastically underpaid compared to what they are in the Twin Cities. But it's really showing up in nursing homes. And, you know, the people that are in nursing homes deserve to have a quality of life, and they deserve to be taken care of. And if we look back at our history in this country, it's been to take care of people. And we need to continue that and make sure we're taking care of our elderly, because many of those elderly have made it possible for us to even just be here today. So we need to look at that different, and we need to keep, and we'll keep working on it. And Paul and I will both keep pushing very hard and see where we can get.
Any chance of getting rid of equalization?
I don't think so. I don't think the votes are there. I think that would be, I think that'd be a real struggle, and I just don't see it happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's the likely cure. It certainly will be a topic of discussion. We will be hearing bills in the House for sure. At the worst, we're gonna still be tied, and we'll have co-chairs, and our Republican chairs I know will hear the bills that we were unable to hear during the trifecta. So these issues will get more attention because we know those bills will be brought before committee.
Yes, sir.
You might explain the equalization issue, the fact that a private pay patient can't be charged more than the Medicaid or medical assistance rate? I mean, that's a critical issue for people to understand. So I'm a retired CPA, I've got a nice long-term care policy, I can afford to pay what the nursing home needs. But when I go into Oak Hills, they can only charge me the Medicaid rate. We're only one of 2 states that has that type of bill. And what Paul and Gary are explaining is that's not easily changed because they're in the minority. Very unfortunate. An area that really is hurting Oak Hills and New Ulm is not only the low reimbursements, and you've explained that could be a tough fix with votes, but the lag in reimbursements. Oak Hills is about 21 to 24 months behind in getting reimbursed by the state. So all those inflationary costs in 22, 23, we're just beginning to get those reimbursements now in 25. And we had a mandate, thanks to the legislation in 23, that raised the minimum rates on almost all the types of employees within Oak Hills. That's going to cost Oak Hills about $650,000 to $700,000 a year in 26, and about $750,000 a year in 27, with no reimbursements. So $1.5 million out of pocket in Oak Hills before the first recovery of those costs occurred. And that's all administrative, it's not legislative. So a place where I'm wondering if there isn't some ability for you to move things along would be to put dollars to the administration of the reimbursements so that it isn't a 2-year lag. The mandate on increased wages is not bad. That could actually help in the recruiting. But if we don't have the money to pay for it, it could mean a real difficulty for Oak Hills.
Yeah, no,
So-
the 2-year delay is a big deal, and it seems unreasonable. And with the sharp increase in costs, the impact of that is much more dramatic than it was when that was put in place. I was in the legislature when we got to the point where we would reimburse for actual costs, but the reimbursement wasn't going to come until that 2-year time period had elapsed. So I think there's that's certainly one of the things that I'm looking at, thinking that maybe we can, because we know we owe the nursing homes that money, why don't we get it to them sooner?
So if you took the total, that 2-year lag, what kind of an interest, I mean, if let's say that we said, okay, we're gonna get this back to a 30 or 60-day payment. So you start getting paid for the stuff that was due 2 years ago as well as the stuff due 60 days ago. So it increased your income considerably. But once that flattened out and you were back now to a 60-day, basically the difference would be is if you were borrowing money, you wouldn't have to pay interest on it. What kind of a dollar, do you have any idea what kind of dollars that might mean for Oak Hills? And you maybe don't.
I do.
Yeah, I figured you would, and that's good.
As a matter of fact, huh?
And the only reason I do is
Yeah.
because of this 2023 legislation, which mandated these increases in minimum wages. And like I said, we had to quantify that. And so the HR staff, payroll staff, it's with payroll taxes and so on, it's north of $700,000 a year, 1.5 million for 2 years before we get reimbursed. The interest on that for 2 years running will be $80,000 a year per year, and then on the upswing, it's about another $20,000 in the first year. So the grand total of the interest is close to $200,000, or right around $200,000 before the 2-year lag would get back to about a 30 to 60 day lag. It's significant.
Yeah.
The problem is not so much the interest itself, but given our position, can we borrow the money?
Right.
You know, and can our reserves handle a $1.5 million hit for 2 years until we start getting recovery?
Yeah, it's,
And you know, Oak Hills, there's a lot of great volunteers, a lot of donors, we may pull it off, but the smaller nursing homes, I mean, that's why we've had these
Struggle.
closures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big issue, no question about it. And that really makes a big difference is when you start looking at that much interest, I mean, that cost, that just takes it out of your cash flow pretty quickly, and there's no reason for that. I mean, it should be being paid as it's incurred. You gotta give some time for it to get processed and stuff, but not 2 years or not a year. I mean, 60 to 90 days maybe, or whatever, and that should be paid to you so you know it's coming in, and that could make a difference, that's for sure. Yep. Yes,
I happen to have a husband who's been in the nursing home now in Oak Hills for almost 6 months. He
Yeah.
started with at-home care, which was wonderful, but you can't have it 24/7. He's 60, 70 pounds heavier than I am, and I could no longer
Right.
manage helping him with issues, falling and so forth. Not to mention many medical issues. I think that the problem goes beyond one facility. It goes beyond recognition of the fact that we have a burgeoning elderly population in rural Minnesota, not so much in the metro area where it seems to attract the younger people. And so I'm foreseeing that we if we aren't using some foresight at what's ahead in all of these communities, both for at-home care, for assisted living, and for nursing home, we're going to be paying big dollars as taxpayers to remediate a problem that could be resolved now if we had foresight and address some of those. When I look at how the many different categories that exist for a single resident, a page and a half of different categories, that 1 month you're here and the next month you're here, and that changes the amount of the bill, et cetera. Administratively, yes, there has to be something else that could be done to simplify things, both for staff at the nursing home and at the state level. Then that might accelerate some things as well.
and it certainly help, it'd make it much simpler, but it'd make it, you'd just be able, there'd be some dollars saved by doing that, that's for sure.
well, and the amount of time that's required to do all that paperwork means that those employees are not spending that time taking care of the residents.
Right, yep. Yes,
Thanks for being here. In addition to the proposal for tax relief on the buffer land, which I assume is going to have a budget impact, what other ag-related proposals are you looking at or considering? And then what are programs that you would want to cut to balance the budget? What are you thinking? Where do you cut? But ag and how
Well,
do you balance the budget?
when it comes to ag is a minuscule portion of the state budget. On a pie chart, it doesn't even get a color, it's so skinny.
I know that, but I'm just wondering
And
what
so,
you're looking at.
you know, exactly, I don't have any proposals myself for continued ag spending. One of the things that I'm very concerned about is the position of agriculture within the university system. The St. Paul campus of Minnesota is an important asset to our land-grant university, and it doesn't always get the attention it deserves. Both Gary and I met with the new president of the university and emphasized how important that is to greater Minnesota. We see our ag students right now going to South Dakota, many of them, because they find that more attractive. And we just, and I won't go into all the details about the university, but there's an issue there that deserves attention. We've seen meat processing is a small example, but there's an example of where the state could help by helping make sure that our meat processing, small meat processing, both portable and brick and mortar based facilities are allowed to function, and the inspection process isn't so complicated that they can't move forward. There's lots of other examples. The AGREE funding needs to be tuned up and maintained. There's lots of ag issues that are pending, and hopefully our ag chairs can get them the proper attention. So
I don't think that we're gonna see a lot of new money in ag. like Paul said, it's such a small piece. But also with that being said, I don't think we'll see money taken away from ag. We did enhance some programs in the last couple of years with some additional dollars, not big numbers, but some additional dollars. The Agreed Fund, we really have to take a look at that and see where that's gonna go, because the way that was set up back in 2011 and 12, and the parameters were put on what that money could be used for, as time went on, we've added and added and added. But originally, the dollars was, in 2011 and 12, the state of Minnesota owed several dollars in back payments to the ethanol plants. So those payments were made whole, and then we passed a bill that said that the dollars that were being paid to the ethanol plants would go into the Agreed Fund and what they could be used for. Well, those dollars have pretty much maintained that amount, and that's the way it was supposed to be. There's been some additions, but the things that it's being used for has been drastically expanded beyond what the scope was supposed to be. So instead of taking that out of the Agreed Fund, it really should have been taken out of special funds, but it's one of those cases to where there was some dollars sitting there. Let's take it out of there and let's let this go into there, and then it becomes habit. And so that's what's happened there. For the University of Minnesota, I am pushing really hard. The St. Paul campus, in my opinion, needs to have its own budget like the other campuses do and not be under the realm of the Minneapolis campus. The Minneapolis campus, the University of Minnesota is a land-grant college. They were put into place before the state was a state. So when the legislative body gives money to the University of Minnesota, once it goes to the University of Minnesota, we have no say in how that money gets used. Now, I don't think we should be micromanaging the University of Minnesota, but I do think that many cases, the money that we should be putting over to St. Paul just doesn't quite make it across the river. And I think we really need to have a separate budget for the St. Paul campus, just like you do for Rochester, just like you do for Duluth or Morris. I mean, they need to be separate budgets so that the St. Paul campus knows what they're going to get, but they also know what they can do with the funds for their buildings and stuff like that. We're seeing a lot of buildings over there that have had no attention. The dormitory, Bailey Hall, was built there back in early 60s, and there's been hardly any change other than carpet and a few floor tile. That's about all that's been changed in that building. And it needs to have some upgrades if we want the St. Paul campus to stand up against other campuses in the ag communities. So those are things that we need to look at. Other questions?
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Back to the nursing home situation, you mentioned earlier that, there's a large number of legislators who want to see the wealthy pay their fair share, and that's why, they want to keep the tax on the Social Security. What is the argument for equalization then? It seems like it's logical that if someone's more capable of paying a higher private rate, have they ever told you what the argument is for equalization? Why can't the wealthy pay their fair share, more of the share for nursing home care than those that are less fortunate?
Well, you get a lot of different reasons. Mostly, I think it is that the people that can pay their way feel that they've paid their way all their lives, and that they should be treated the same as anybody else is when they get to that age. Whether that's a good reason or not, I'm not sure, but it would be quite an interesting, if that ended up on the floor as a debate, it'd be quite an interesting debate. And I just don't see the votes would be there, to be very honest with you. Yep.
It's hard to imagine when only 2 states had decided that equalization makes sense, 48 haven't. So,
It's kind of bipartisan, the support
There's
for equalization.
bipartisan support and bipartisan
And
opposition.
opposition,
So
yeah.
It cuts across, and as Gary said, a variety of reasons. Perhaps we could make some kind of progress where we would allow a percentage over the Medicaid rate rather than just a wide open door. I don't know if that's a possibility.
anything would help the nursing homes.
Yeah, if you're not gonna fund it the other way, that would be a
Yeah,
logical
no,
path, right?
your ideas are noted, and we'll be
Isn't
looking
there-
for anything we can to help them out.
Isn't there a thought that people would get different care?
Oh,
I mean, I don't think they would at Oak Hills.
I don't think
Oak
they
Hills is
would.
a-
I don't
I
think-
don't,
I
but
don't think-
I think that's
I don't think,
theoretically that would be
I
an
suppose
argument.
there would be
It's
some
not
people
set
that
up
think
that
that
way.
way, but I don't
Everybody
believe
gets
it's a
it.
real
Yeah.
issue.
You think so?
I would say that
We have to have a
that's,
tag on there.
if you've got a bucket of reasons why you should or shouldn't do it, it would be part of that, it would be one of the reasons in the bucket, but it wouldn't get very high. I mean, I think there's just a lot of different reasons and a lot of different attitudes and opinions as to how that should happen and what should happen. Yep. Other questions?
I just got a comment. We've heard this wealthy thing brought up about who's wealthy, who's not wealthy. There's a lot of people in this room that I would see as wealthy. There are people in this room that would see me as wealthy. I think I've worked for everything I've got. In fact, I know I did. And for somebody else to assume why I'm wealthy or anybody else is wealthy, during COVID, there's a lot of us that didn't get a dime from the government on all this money that was being handed out. And I could mention numerous things about this wealthy thing, non-wealthy thing, but I think this wealthy thing is a bunch of BS.
Yes, sir.
Good. Number one thing is, we spent the $18 billion. Are there programs in there that do not sunset, that was gonna have to pay for now once we get past that?
Well, there was a lot of one-time money in that $39.5 billion that was spent in 2023.
Yeah.
However, keep in mind, when I hear about one-time money, that says you're gonna get it once, that's it,
Should be.
conversation over. Legislatively, not really. Legislatively, sometimes it's one and done, over, that's it. Other times, it's put in the budget, but you don't want to carry it through the tails, and you don't want to carry it into the next biennium, so you do it as one-time money. Fully thinking that when you get to the next budget, you would just bring it back and continue it. And so, when we talk about sunsets, there's very few things that are sunset. There's just, it's a one-time money type thing. And so this year, the attitude that I could just bring it back and get it refunded is probably going to be pretty tough because there's not going to be money to fund it. Because the one-time funding is not included when they do the budget proposals, and when they do the forecast, one-time money is not included in the forecast because it was considered to be one-time money. So there are dollars, and I don't know how much of that was one-time money. There was some COVID money. Then they went and they took money out of different pots that was sitting there. They took that out and spent that on some things. But I would assume totally maybe 10 billion, maybe 8 to 10 billion in one-time money. I don't know how close I'll be, but I'm not going to be too far off.
Well, the other thing that I was concerned about is education. Greater Minnesota is $5,000 to $6,000 per student less than the urban areas. Is there any way to bring some of that money out to rural Minnesota? We do it on about $10,000, $10,500 a year per student. You're at $16,000 a year in the Twin Cities, Rochester, places like that. We do handstands that they give us another $1,000 of that, you know, because we balance all our budgets, I mean, and stuff like that. I watch what the school does, and they work hard to make it work, and we do it with a lot less money than the others.
Actually, you're bringing up a very good point, and that was one of the things I referred to earlier when I said we have this nursing home crisis. The education crisis is the same thing. It isn't the crisis that the nursing homes have, but the spending, it's on that same plateau where we get this much, the 7-county metro gets this much, and then the inner city gets a whole lot more. And it's just a drastic big shift. And so we keep, what we have done as Republicans, when we were in charge, we would, if we had an increase, it was done on a per capita basis. So New Ulm got the same as New Hope. Once you start putting all the categoricals in, so you got your base formula for education, and then you have the categoricals that go on top of that. And each school gets some different dollars. When you throw the categoricals in, then that gets it real lopsided between New Hope and New Ulm. If you just do it on the base formula, it's pretty much a New Ulm student's gonna get the same as a New Hope student. So that's the way we did it. Now, this past budget biennium, they did it different again. They did a lot of it through mandates and stuff like that, which usually weight the money going to the metropolitan schools at a higher rate than it does for the rural schools. And so that's one of the things that we always like to do is go per capita, and that's one of the things, if we got back in the majority, we would be looking at doing again. But it's hard to get that through the system because the way the votes lay out, the Twin Cities has always had a pretty good shot at education as far as getting dollars. And they do it through mandates, and then they set the mandates so it's harder for the rural schools to have the meet that mandate or to qualify for it.
You just triggered something in my mind. Is there any way to reverse mandates? I hate mandates because it takes your choice away from you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agreed, Fred. We've seen this last time around, for instance, in education, a significant amount of money was put into education,
Yeah.
but tied with that were there's numerous mandates, expensive mandates. So we've seen school districts really forced to reduce programming,
Yeah.
even in spite of increased funding, because of all the things they were mandated to spend money on. And what you're doing is you're cutting off the authority of our local school districts. You know, those folks were elected to do a job, they understand their own community and district, and we should allow them to do the local control that they're elected to do.
Well, I work with 5 different school districts, and the difference in what the programs that are out there, and the administration that knows where to go after the money. Because there are different programs that some of us don't have the slightest ideas even out there. And I've worked with the Department of Education, and I've worked with several superintendents, and they've all been good to work with.
Right.
But it's just very uneven.
Well, it's a capacity situation. If you have a large school district with lots of staff, you can focus people on that kind of work to find out where those programs are and apply for them. Whereas you got a small school district, the same as a small town, you just don't have the staff to do that kind of stuff.
Well, whatever can be done to help them. I mean, because rural does a better job of taking care of the dollar than anything that I've ever seen in this state. There is no comparison.
Well, you get no argument from us, Fred.
Okay, all right. Well, I could argue with you for the next 50 years.
Well, I know that.
Yeah.
The rural, when we take a look at our educators, the education system in rural Minnesota versus a metropolitan, our systems are very, very well-oiled machines out here, and they do very well on the number of dollars that they get to do it on. There's no question about it, but that does not mean we don't need to try to continue to get them more dollars.
I don't mean to take anything away from our administration and our teachers and that in rural. They do a tremendous
Yes, they
job.
do.
But it's just the idea of the funding, you know.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely,
so short
yeah.
compared to the other.
And for those of you
About it.
For those of you that don't know, Fred had to move to New Ulm so I could be his representative.
Don't hurt your arm patting yourself in the back here, my friend.
Well, you're in the same boat, so.
Yes,
Hi, Chris Manderfeld. I'm representing the New Ulm Public Utilities. And I'm wondering if you can just maybe talk a little bit about the bonding bill.
yep.
You are sponsoring a bill
Yes.
again for us.
Mhm.
I appreciate that. The wastewater, our wastewater plant has probably about $111 million worth of improvements that are needed over the next 20 years. And a lot of that is driven by mandates, increased regulation, you know, it's just costs a lot. And so, again, I appreciate you doing this. Any little bit, we're asking for $2 million. That's a small amount, so, you know, hoping that will get through. But can you maybe talk a little bit about what you might expect this round? We didn't get, you know, we put it in the past. We have not gotten anything yet.
So it would have very likely been in the last bonding bill had we had a bonding bill, but the bonding bill didn't end up getting across the finish line.
Yep.
I think we'll probably very likely have a bonding bill again this year,
Okay.
and I hope it gets across the finish line. And Paul and I are very supportive of getting that back into the bill. And so it's kind of interesting with bonding. To answer your question, I think there will be a bill, and I will be doing whatever I can to get it on the Senate side into the bill. And, but bonding is very interesting. Sometimes it takes 3 to 4 times to get some money. The other thing is how you tie into PFA. And I don't know what your ratings are, as far as I don't know what your numbers are, as far as how high you are on the list.
I have documents for you here, so.
And can you tell me where you're at?
We scored 59, and we're 106 on the line.
Okay, so you're you're number 106.
Yeah.
Yep. So it.
And I don't know how to change that, you know, every year, you know.
Right.
Right now, we have a lift station where we can't even really go into it. We need to do all of our maintenance through hatches because it really is
Right.
not safe
Yep.
to be in there. And every year it gets worse. So,
Well, well, I can say this, I can't promise you a bonding bill and can't promise you'll be in it, but we will certainly try to head it that direction, and hopefully we're successful.
yeah,
Yep.
I would appreciate it. Certainly, I can come and testify in front of the committee again.
I
if
think
I'm
you'll be
allowed.
fine because we were out here on the bonding tour, not last
Yeah.
year, I think it was the year before, was it?
2023. in
Yeah,
the
we were
fall,
out here.
yeah.
So usually if we come on site, which is the best hearing you can get is on site.
Okay.
Usually if we come on site, then we don't have people come in and do hearings because we've been out and saw the actual issues and had an opportunity to talk with your folks about it and have some exchanging correspondence on that, so.
How do you think the future will be? I mean, there's a lot of wastewater plants that are
Yes.
in our position where there's huge dollar amounts. You know, our plant back in the 70s was built with EPA money, you know, and so we've made our regular improvements to it, but there's a lot of other plants around the state in greater Minnesota that are looking at huge dollar amounts, you know, and then with increased regulation.
Yeah,
What,
the costs
what's
are,
the future?
the
You know,
costs
rates
are-
can't
yeah.
cover that.
and then throw PFAS on top of that.
Exactly,
The-
exactly.
It's very expensive, but I think there's a commitment in Minnesota to continue to support that work because it's so important to it's a big, kind of a basic right that you have good, clean drinking water and that your wastewater is properly treated. Working with PFA, as you know, we've had this discussion before, but making sure that everything is up to snuff with them and you're as high on the list as you can possibly be is important. Your project is one we've been working on for a while.
Yeah,
I
and I
agree with
appreciate
Gary that I think there will be a bonding bill this year. I think there's a good chance we can get that project in. I think the bonding bill will be more focused on these types of projects, local infrastructure, and with less kind of fluffy stuff in there.
Yeah, it's disheartening when you
So-
see parks getting,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly, and we feel this,
joy.
we feel not parks are important too, don't get me wrong, but
I know,
clean, safe drinking water is more important. So, we'll,
Public Facilities Authority.
yeah, I think it's one of the very few state agencies that I really like. They really do good work because
Super
they help small communities, all communities, actually get in line and do the work they need to do to qualify for both state and federal funding. If you don't have a good plan and if the plan isn't well vetted, you're not gonna get funding. But PFA helps people get what they need, and that's why I like that agency. And they coordinate both state funds and federal funds. They have both grants and loans, and they help us do the work well. Now, what happens though is some legislators try to jump the line through, well, they don't call it earmarks, but it's the same as an earmark, and then that means that somebody else that should get funding doesn't get it. Although we did hear just recently, I don't know if you noticed, there are a number of projects that just recently got funding. And when those projects get knocked off the top of the list, everybody else moves up, so that's a good thing.
Did they help pay for your septic system when your cats go home?
No. That's a whole nother discussion, as you well know.
He was sure hoping you were gonna say yes. Yes,
Well, speaking of agencies,
yeah.
I don't know, I'm not really certain about this, but the governor has established some sort of fraud investigative
Yeah.
unit, and I know that earlier on, between the sessions, your Republican colleagues have talked about tightening up various rules in light of the difficult situation with fraud for feeding, feeding our children and, the rest of that. But I was
Yeah.
just wondering, just talk a little bit about your approach to these sort of, how do we keep the criminals out of the public?
It's
Well-
a high priority. We in the House are setting up a separate fraud and abuse committee that will have subpoena power. And I think we have to do it. It's a very important topic, but it's not going to save our budget, right? I mean, there's significant dollars going out. When you talk about $100 million, it's a lot of money. But when you look at it in the scope of our multi-billion-dollar budget, we can't just, fixing the fraud and abuse is not going to fix the state budget. It needs to be fixed, and we will pay attention to it, but we have other fish to fry too.
Well, this new agency or this new fraud bureau he's putting together, it's kind of interesting because what he's doing is he's taking money. If you take a look at, he's bringing in the insurance fraud division from Commerce. The insurance fraud division has several members of that division that takes care of insurance fraud. That money comes from assessments to the insurance companies and from premiums from the insurers. So now what he's doing is he's taking that money to use that for something totally different. This is just a facade, in my opinion. I think it's really unfortunate that he would take the money from the insurance companies that was going to fight insurance fraud and now move it over to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension to be used for other things. That money, if he's going to do that, that money needs to come out of the general fund, not out of the insurance fund. So the big difference is when you have insurance fraud, that's people frauding the insurance companies, and the insurance companies are paying to have that taken care of. When you have fraud, like feeding the children, that is fraud of people defrauding the state of Minnesota. We're looking at two different crimes. We're looking at two different ways of doing it. And it's a nice soundbite that he's doing that. My question is, where was he when he knew this was happening and refused to do anything about it? That's where the problem is. If we're going to have crime and it's going to be reported and it's going to be known, then take care of it. Putting together this fraud bureau is not the answer to the problem, in my opinion. And I think it's very unfortunate.
Was it the governor did that?
The governor just did that the other day.
He has the authority to do that?
But
it says
that's
that.
being questioned right now, if he has the authority to do that.
I've watched some of the things that happen, and like the non-essential businesses, everything's essential in this world. It's how you live.
Yep.
There's an interesting editorial in the Minneapolis paper today about the existing ability of the state to investigate fraud. There's all kinds of investigators in so many departments. People should read the editorial.
Yeah, if we're going to have any real impact, it has to be an independent entity that actually investigates, not one that comes from within the department, in my opinion. So, departments, I should say.
We are at that time, folks. Thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions or we can be of any assistance, you can certainly call our offices. Paul and I both do newsletters, and they come out through, we send ours out on the internet. So if you want to get onto our newsletters, we do them weekly during session, and then when we're out of session, usually do one monthly, kind of an update of what's going on. And so if you get to the Capitol, certainly let us know. We'd sure, if you're at the Capitol, certainly like to meet with you. And with that said, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Paul.
Well, thank you, Gary, and thanks to all of you for being here this morning. It's appreciated. We're happy to hear from you, and you know how to, I think, know how to reach us. If you don't, just look us up on the web. I will caution you somewhat if you're thinking about coming to St. Paul. The state office building where I've had my office for the last number of years is not occupied. It's under reconstruction and addition. So we are in the Centennial Office Building, which is across the Capitol Mall from the state office building, still close to the Capitol. But it's pretty clumsy. You have to be escorted in and escorted out. I'm fortunate that I have a nice big office. Being near the top of the seniority list has some benefits. But many of my colleagues only have cubicles. They don't even have an office with a door and walls. So plan ahead, it would be my advice. Get in contact with my office well in advance of a visit so we can make sure that we have a space to meet and the timing works out. But we'd love to have you come up to St. Paul or reach out in any of the other ways that are available, whether it's phone or email or whatever, and have a safe trip on your way home today.
And I'd like to thank the library for allowing
yeah.
us to use this facility. We've been doing this for years. It works out well. We truly do appreciate it, so thank you.
And local cable for covering our
Yes,
town
absolutely.
hall meetings is
Yep.
appreciated too. So thank you all.
Thank you.